It's just a huge honor for me today to be podcast interviewing Richard E. Mounce, DDS, who practices endodontics in Eagle River, Alaska. He has lectured globally and is widely published in the specialty of endodontics. Dr. Mounce has been a consultant and key opinion leader for a wide number of companies, including SybronEndo, Vista, EasyEndo USA, Tun Ultrasonics, and Metabiomed. He graduated from dental school at Northwestern University in 1985 and Oregon Health Science University endodontics in 91. Richard, I have been a fan of yours forever and ever and ever. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. The feeling's mutual.
The first question, I want to ask you so many questions, but the first thing I want to ask you is, these kids, whenever they raise the tuition of dental school $10,000 a year, it has no effect on the number of applicants. So we've seen dental schools go from, $40,000 a year to $100,000 a year. I think there's over 5 dental schools now that are over $110,000 a year. And they come out of school and, the most dental office practice management consultants say that, if you're not getting 7 toothaches a month, something's seriously wrong with your demographics, your location, it's a huge red flag. In fact, some of these DSOs, if they open up an office and after 3 months, they're not doing 7 toothaches a month, they just roll up the office and say it didn't work. Yet these kids come out of school and half of them, they got all the student loans to pay back, and half of them say, I hate endo. I'm not doing molar endo. And it kind of hurts the public health side of dentistry when you might be the only dentist in a small town and Melinda just decides she doesn't like endo. I mean, imagine you going to the hospital after you fell off your bicycle with a broken leg and the hospital said, we don't do legs. We only do arms, ears, noses. So what would you say to that young 25-year-old dentist? She just graduated and she already hates molar endo and doesn't even want to do one. Talk to that girl.
Yeah, that's a really tough one because you'd have to break it down into all the steps of what it takes to do a molar endo properly. And to cut to the chase, the difference of practicing the specialty at the highest level with cone beams and microscopes and activated irrigation and bioceramic sealers and all of the different top-of-the-line technology and what you're going to know coming out of dental school, you have a significant experiential gap and literature-based gap. So that one's really tough. My best advice as a starting place would be go watch an endodontist work. Take every endodontic class that you possibly can across the entire spectrum. I would subscribe to Endodontic Practice USA, Lisa Moller's magazine. That's an excellent source of street smart information. I'd get a subscription to the Journal of Endodontics. And, the AAE has an amazing educational portal called Endo On Demand. Every lecture back to 2013 that's been given at any national endodontic available. The AAE, the American Association of Endo. And literally every lecture that's been given, sponsored by the AAE, is there in the whole presentation, including the slides and the audio. So you can listen to an unbelievable variety of different lectures. I listen to about 2 hours a day of that now, and you can get CE for it. So point being, to the young graduate who doesn't like molar endo, who really feels like it's foreign and is uncomfortable, there are a tremendous amount of resources out there for that person to gain experience. At the end of the day, whether they like it or not, and whether they want to continue or whether they want to do molar endo is a different story. But there's a lot of great educational resources available. The other thing would be very, very few general dentists talk to their specialists or treat them as a partner in the process. So that young doctor calling the endodontist and saying, I'd like to learn from you, I'd like to be able to call you, ask questions, talk about cases, come over after work, sit down over a cup of coffee, that doesn't happen very often, and it's really a missed opportunity. So I think all of those things could certainly help a young dentist in that situation. And at the end of the day, if they don't like endodontics, then they should find an excellent referral source or someone they trust who can do it for them.
So if you go to, so you're talking about, and by the way, you said a shout out to Endodontic magazine with Lisa Moller. She's right up the street from me.
I know.
She's a great person. The AAE.org, you said you go there, and where do you go on AAE.org?
It's called Endo on Demand, and it's a.
Oh, it's a separate website, Endo on Demand?
Well, there's I don't know because I'm just automatically plugged into it, but if you go to the AAE, you'll find a portal for Endo on Demand, and it's an incredible resource. You've got the best speakers in the world, the top specialists in the world talking about dozens of subjects within endodontics, and it's the most updated, recent information presented at the highest level, and I love it. Really good stuff.
All righty. Well, I learned something on my own show like I do everyone. It's you go to AAE.org/specialty/education-events/endo on demand. They definitely so is that how much money is that? Does it cost money?
It costs us, I want to say it's under $300 surcharge a year on top of our membership. I'm not sure what the solo cost is for utilizing that resource.
Endo on demand. And then on Dental Town, we, on our continuing education under Endo now, we have 33 classes on Endo 2. So that Endo on demand, that is, I did not know they have that. Thanks for coming on today and telling us about that. And by the way, to the listeners, I like to talk about companies and products because if you took away about 500 dental companies, dentists would be sitting outside on a rug with a bunch of pliers and forceps from Home Depot. And then dentists sit there and say on Dental Town, they say, yeah, but that guy, he's selling this stuff for money. It's like, what, are you a volunteer dentist? Are you doing free dentistry at a public health clinic? I mean, there's a lot of, when I graduated in dental school in 87, for the first 5 years, I had a blister on my thumb and my finger from doing this whole day. And
right.
when the first person turned me on to rotary, remember John McSpadden out of Chattanooga?
Oh yeah.
And he got into that because he happened to be like 6'4" and 280 pounds, and his hand was the size of my head, and he had to figure out rotary endo, and back then it was cyclical stainless steel, and so you and I have seen so many innovations going on in endo, and I want to talk about as many of those as I can because you are tied into so many endodontic companies. Everybody's talking about SybronEndo. Why is that?
Well, it's a truly transformative technology. There's plenty of hype in the universe in the dental space, but SybronEndo really does have the potential to, I would say, both change and potentially end endodontics as we know it. To describe it for the listeners who never are not familiar with it, there's a console that looks like a laser, and the technology involves a handpiece that fits over the top of an access cavity. There's a seal created, and solutions of hypochlorite and EDTA are flushed through the tooth using multisonic energy, and the solutions are degassed, they're debubbled. So essentially what's happening with neutral to negative pressure, you're putting these waves of bleach and liquid EDTA through the tooth in a highly controlled manner. And the levels of disinfection are, according to the literature that we have, significantly better than the competing technologies. Now, significance kind of that gets into some other connotations, but the gist of it is that it's taken the disinfection stage of endodontics, which is the most crucial portion of the process, and mechanized it in a way that's never been done before. So it has just a phenomenal transformative potential in endodontics.
Well, when you're mechanically finding all the canals, cleaning them out, shaping them, getting ready to obturate them, what percent is physically debrided? And then what percent of all those little tubes and flares and shapes of the canals are not removed and would benefit from something like that?
Yeah, my best reading of the literature, that's a really good question, Howard. And your question's kind of twofold. What percentage is taken out from debridement through rotary and reciprocating files, and how much is the fine tuning or the microscopic cleaning through activated irrigation. And it's probably 90% of the debris or better is taken out ish during the gross debridement, and the remainder is done through your irrigation technique and your activation. The term activation in the general dental community is not well appreciated or potentially understood. And I don't have statistics on what percentage of general dentists activate, but if you walked in and asked 100 general dentists, do you activate your irrigation, you'd probably get about 90 blank stares. So that is using sonic, ultrasonic, negative pressure, mechanical activation, or something like SybronEndo to enhance the performance of the solutions. But at a specialty level, it's absolutely critical that and I think in the general dental endodontic treatment as well, that irrigation is activated, because it makes that much difference between the gross debridement and then a cold passive irrigation compared to what something like SybronEndo or ultrasonic technique could do.
So what is this doing to the success rate? Because one of the most exciting lectures I ever gave in my life was in Florida to a dental insurance convention, and they were showing me all this data about their insurance data, and they don't share it. I mean, it's private data, and I wish this data means so much, and it should be mined and transparent and all this stuff like that. But they were showing me data that if they just measure a root canal success rate as in 5 years, is that tooth still in the human's mouth or was it extracted? And they were saying that endodontists, 5% of their molars are extracted in 5 years, and general dentists, it's 10%. So the difference between an endodontist and a general dentist is about 1 in 20 molars. Do you believe those numbers? I mean, these are based on millions of claims.
Yeah, really good question again, Howard. I do believe those numbers because the vast majority of endodontic procedures done are not by general practitioners, are not done under a microscope. And secondarily, I can't quote you a statistic, but there's a significant number of endodontic procedures done without rubber dam. And then you have a significant number of procedures not done with activated irrigation. So when you take those facts and you transfer them into success failure literature or statistics, that number of 5% endodontist molar failure, 10%, that kind of passes the smell test to me. Your other question was related to SybronEndo success versus success without SybronEndo. That's a trickier proposition because my recollection of the literature, there was a study that came out recently, I want to say it was in the Journal of Endodontics, that quoted success with SybronEndo somewhere in the 97, give or take a percentage point range, and the accepted success for all the endodontic procedures is in the 93 to 95% range amongst endodontists. I mean, in the most recent studies using the optimal technologies. So, is SybronEndo going to lead to a greater success rate, and is it worth the cost? That's really the million-dollar question, because a SybronEndo console costs about $80,000. Each handpiece is single-use, disposable, costs somewhere between $50 and $100 a piece. So to utilize this technology, it is arguable, I'm going to be diplomatic, it's arguable whether it's applicable to the average clinician working and doing 2 or 3 root canals a week. That gets into a whole other conversation. Is the cost versus the benefit, and is it worth it?
So you're saying the SybronEndo, the gentle wave system, costs how much per root canal?
Well, the console is about, ballpark, is about $80,000, give or take some, depends on what you negotiate. And the hand pieces are about $50 to $100 a piece, depending on how many you buy at a time.
How much are the hand pieces?
$50 to $100 per case.
What?
And the process.
Wow. So you have a $50 disposable handpiece, $50 to $100 per case per molar root canal.
Well, per tooth, period.
per tooth. That's
Right.
that's a chunk of change.
And you're adding about 8 to 10 minutes per procedure. And I want to be clear, I don't have any commercial interest with SybronEndo. I don't work for them. I have no connection to them officially or unofficially. But so I'm not connected to them. I find this particular technology to be the one or two things that's come up since I've been an endodontist, including rotary, nickel titanium, controlled memory, nickel titanium, and the microscope that has really been had the potential to change the specialty.
Yeah, so that is a serious cost, $80,000. So obviously, so what percent of endodontists do you think are going to get this? There's what, about 4,500 endodontists in the United States?
Yeah, good call.
How many endodontists do you think are in the United States, and how many are in the world?
4,500 is a good number. And there's probably ballpark 400 to 600 endodontists in the U.S. who have the gentle wave now. And so somewhere in that range. That's my best guesstimate. I don't work for the company.
Yeah,
I don't know for.
So it starts off, why does endo fail? That's what we were talking about. Endodontist, 5% failure rate, general dentist, 10%. The first things you said, they weren't working under a scope or rubber dam. Do you think if a dentist is doing a root canal every week that they should get a scope?
Yes.
And would you recommend global or Zeiss?
They're both excellent machines. The thing about microscopes, Howard, is that you can buy a used 5-step microscope, and I have one sitting in my garage. If anybody wants to buy it, call me. I have a 5-step scope with inclinable binoculars that you can buy them used for $5,000, $4,000, $6,000. They're not really very expensive, and you can put them on a floor stand. You can move them between your operatories. So there's a lot of used, like you could buy a used car or a new car. You don't have to, you don't have to go big on a scope. And if you're doing one a week and you bought a microscope for $3,000 or $4,000. It's more than going to pay for itself in canals you found and things you saw and cracks you saw and things like that.
Well, you said you got to use one in your garage. I think the most hidden asset of Dentaltown is we have Dentaltown classified ads, and there's about 5,600 ads on there, and it's amazing what you can buy half off used. I mean, everybody does it with cars, but you should you should put that scope on the classified ads.
I will do it.
And it'll fly away. So scope is important. You said, my big deal is it doesn't seem like anybody's doing anything faster, easier, higher quality, if they're not, and profitable if they're not doing it once a week. Like people will get into sleep medicine and they'll do one case every other month. But when you factor in all the continuing education and all the everything, right. If you can't hit critical mass, which I believe is one a week, you're not going to ever do it well enough or profitable enough. And, when I got a vasectomy, I didn't want to go to some guy who does like one every 5 years. I wanted to go to the best guy. So rubber dam, that's still an issue?
It is still an issue. I'm looking at I'm starting to do a fair bit more in expert witness for legal cases. And I'm looking at a case right now where there's not a single picture in the chart. There were 5-ish root canals done. There's no images of a rubber dam clamp or any cone fit pictures in the charting. And only half of the teeth that were done even have a rubber dam notation, but there's no proof that a rubber dam was used. So it's an issue. It's an issue in 2019. Hard to believe, but true.
What about the other issue when you and I got out of school? When you and me were babies, Sargenti was still the big deal. I mean, my gosh, around here, when I got out of school at 25, anyone who was 60 was still using it. Did that go away completely? Is it gone, or is it?
I think so. I haven't seen a Sargenti type treatment in a long time. I suppose if you practice in a place where you had a lot of people from Eastern Europe, you may still see the Russian red paste kind of material. What exactly is in that's always been a bit of a mystery, because sometimes it's sludge and sometimes it's concrete. But I don't practice in an area that has too many of those cases anymore, just kind of like silver cones. So it's been a long time since I've seen a Sargenti type fill.
So for you kids who, I mean, if you just got out of dental school, I don't know how you would have ever heard of Sargenti, but basically it was a good theory. The theory was we're just going to get down into the tooth and put a bunch of toxic paraformaldehyde down there, and that will kill all the bugs and germs, and we're done with it. But looks like it was coming out the apex of the tooth, and there's a lot of what do you think put the nail in the coffin of Sargenti?
Oh, just the toxicity and the lawsuits and the bad outcomes. Ultimately, the combination of those three things brought that to an end. It's interesting you bring this up, because one of the challenges we've got now is extrusion of calcium hydroxide. So I won't name manufacturers, but there's one particular brand of calcium hydroxide which is much more viscous and flows far more freely than others. And there have been a number of lawsuits where the mandibular canal gets filled in with calcium hydroxide. So if I had a little bit of caution to give to a young dentist using calcium hydroxide is this is one of the benefits of having a microscope, is you got to know exactly where the tip of your extruding needle is in relation to vital structures like the mandibular canal, the metal nerve, things like that. If you have an open apex in a lower second molar and you have a non-vital tooth that you're splitting into two visits, you want to proceed with extreme caution, because it is easy to, with the wrong technique, to extrude calcium hydroxide and cause permanent injury. So it's a variant of Sargenti in a sense, and there have been a number of cases, legal cases in the last few years with that problem.
Because the calcium hydroxide, instead of a neutral pH that bugs love to live in, it's making it real basic. So that would be the activation to kill them. So back to that. Are you a pulp lover or an apical barbarian? I mean, there's which one are you? I mean, there's two types of endodontists, and one wants to just get a 0.5 millimeter from the apex and have it look all pretty. Another ones are like, no way, man, I want to see that sealer paste bust out the end, make sure I got it all. So are you a pulp lover or an apical barbarian?
Well, I'm an apical barbarian, because I think when you're a pulp lover, you tend to always end up a little bit shorter than where you intended. But I also am not impressed with extruding a lot of excess material. And I don't have to have a puff to feel like I got where I wanted to go. I'm very precise about trying to locate the minor constriction and know where that material is going, and try to prevent, stay patent, but prevent extrusion if I can. But to me, if you're a pulp lover, you're going to end up shorter and leave more debris than you will if you're an apical barbarian. One of the trade-offs, though, Howard, is if you're a apical barbarian, you're almost by definition going to end up with a little more post-op discomfort. So, patients need to know that that debris, when it's potentially extruded during instrumentation and maybe during downpack, if you get some material extruded, they're going to have more post-op symptoms.
So I've been talking to a lot of endodontists that tell me their molar times are actually slowing down. I think the average endodontist, when I got out of school, they were usually completing 3 to 4 cases a day. And then with rotary instruments and all that, it got up to more 4 or 5 cases a day. But now with scopes and all the technology and all that, they're back down to 3 or 4 a day. So molars are, instead of taking an hour, they're taking an hour and a half. What is your time on a molar endo?
We book. So I'm in a little bit of a different situation, but we book 2 hours because I spend a lot of time initially in the examination phase. I think that the case is won or lost before you ever pick up the syringe. So you look at the patient, you look at the tooth, and you say, this is a patient that I can treat successfully, and this is a tooth that I have fully examined in every way to know that I can land the plane, so to speak, of the procedure. So a patient knows it could be cracked, that there may be an extra root, there may be 5 canals, there's going to be an MB2. Sometimes we need a cone beam before we start. So my time from start to finish between informed consent and everything else, it's probably an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes plus the examination time. And to answer why it's taking longer is I think that with the cone beam especially, we're learning how much more complicated these spaces are and how much more anatomy there is to address that we never really fully appreciated before because we couldn't really see it in two-dimensional x-rays. And, we know from both the cone beam as well as a microscope that when you take into account isthmuses and fins and lateral canals and all of the different anatomy, that things are much more complicated than we were thinking before. And if you're practicing with a conscience and you're really trying to do comprehensive treatment, cleaning and shaping and obturation, you're going to spend that extra time making sure that you take all the steps diligently through the process.
And you're doing a lot of expert witnesses on root canals. You will consult on that for the dentist or the patient, just depending on who hires you.
Well, generally, it's the attorneys are contacting me both on the defense side and on the plaintiff side. And, if I had, let me digress, Howard, for about 30 seconds. If I had a little bit of advice for the young dentist right out of school, I would say 2 things come right to mind. One would be, inform before you perform. Make sure you have informed consent. Make sure you've reached a diagnosis. Make sure that everything is documented extremely well. And resist the temptation, if you work in a big DSO, to cut corners, trying to save time to stay on schedule. Because at the end of the day, the common thread of virtually all of the cases that I see is that either somebody's doing something that they're not qualified to do, or that they basically were in a hurry and didn't assess what was right there. And I'll give you a quick example. I saw a case where a dentist did a one-shot endodontic procedure on a patient who had true swelling and firm numbness and anesthesia in their lower jaw on a lower molar. And so the dentist went in and did a one-shot procedure on that, and the patient ended up in the hospital with all kinds of bad sequelae and a huge bill and a lot of other problems. And, that's basic endodontics 101. The patient is numb. The patient has swelling. The patient has a firm mass in their lower jaw. There was no discussion of referral, no discussion of incision and drainage, no discussion in the records of opening that tooth and putting in calcium hydroxide or any of the normal steps that are appropriate for that treatment. And so then compounding the issue, and this is another ubiquitous thing I've seen in my records, the dentist doesn't either apologize or give the money back. And the patient, if a patient asks you for the money back, add a 0 when you write the check, because by the time you go through the process of the lawsuit to, somehow massage your ego, you're going to spend a lot more of your stomach lining than you ever would have just writing the check and the refund. And these things are bad, it's bad juju in the community and all the way around. But that's the other ubiquitous finding is there's an insensitivity on the part of the clinician that makes the patient pissed off enough that they want to go back and sue the doctor.
Yeah, and they, I love the fact that you spend so much time with the patient, but make sure before you inform, before you perform. These dentists don't realize. I had a friend who had a problem. It went to a full jury. He lost the maximum. The insurance covered $1 million. And you know what? He never smiled about dentistry again. It burned him out completely. He retired a few years after that. He just left on a sour note. And it's just a shame that some of this stuff has to happen. So that's a diagnostic malpractice. Or you have a lot of other cases because of broken file. And by the way, has the broken file incidents dropped significantly from when they first started coming out when we were using them in the 80s?
Yeah, again, I don't have any commercial interests in this. I'm going to drop a name of a file system that nobody's ever really heard of, but it's BASSI BASSI Endo. And Hiki Bossi makes a controlled memory file that called a Logic system, like logic, LOGIC. And I don't, in full disclosure, I used to be the general manager for him in the United States, and I have no profit, no interest, no commercial relationship with him now. Those files, you really have, to break a file in 2019, it happens, but in an endodontic practice, an endodontist who's doing it all day long is probably breaking one a year. And, there are certain curvatures and certain situations where you never really fully know why it happens. But I mentioned Bossi's files because his method of manufacture, and we get into that if you want to, is so unique that it's just hard to break them if you use them the right way. So the incidence has dropped, and having patency and having a glide path and being able to see what you're doing through the scope and having your motor settings be correct, the incidence of file fracture is significantly lower than what it was back when I started.
Is SybronEndo? Is that after an endodontist named Bossi?
Yeah, his name is Inhiki Bossi. It's an interesting story. I'll just describe it.
How do you spell his name?
BASSI is his last name. His first name is Enrique with an H.
ENRIQUE. Enrique Bossi. Well, tell him to come on my show and tell us about his file.
Yeah, Bossi is a really fascinating guy. And one of the quick thing I wanted to mention later in the show is there's a lot of people in dentistry who have product ideas and they want to become wealthy through a non-practice-based income source. And I've spent a lot of time in industry, and Bossi's really an inspirational story. And the short version is that he was frustrated in Brazil with the big boys and the prices of files. So he went out and bought a grinding machine, started grinding his own nai-tai, and now he is the largest producer of nai-tai in South America. He's much bigger than Dentsply or Sybron or Edge or anybody else in Brazil. And he is the big boy in Brazil, and it all started because he went out and bought a machine 20 years ago and started to grind his own nai-tai files. It's an amazing story, but a true one. Good guy, really good guy.
That is amazing. I remember when rotary files started taking off. I mean, there were some just incredibly, it was some really aggressive people. Like one company was making a file, and one of their competitors bought the company that was making his nai-tai files. And
right.
And you remember all those stories?
Well, those things are still going on. Maybe not quite in the same way, but those types of litigations are still ongoing.
Oh,
and purchases and different things.
It reminded me of the book. Do you remember the book, The Chocolate Wars, where it was basically they were there was two major competitors in chocolate, and God, what were they? I'm trying to remember what they were, but it's Hershey's and Mars. Is that what it is? Hershey's and Mars.
That sounds right.
And oh my God, you'd think they were just playing for, you think one was ran by Napoleon and one was ran by Genghis Khan. One of them could go to a foreign country and bribe the dictator with a big old bribe, and then that dictator would pass law that only that company's chocolate could go in that entire country. And it was just stuff like that all day long, and they were doing that same type of deal with endo files. And so Bossi started making his own files. That is Enrique Bossi. Interesting. Or is this files, you say they're safer, less likely to break? Are they lower cost?
They are lower cost. And, So the magic sauce in it is that they put the control memory into the instrument, which means that when you put a force on the instrument, it maintains the curvature. So if you have an instrument that's controlled memory, if I bend it, it stays curved, so it remains curved as it rotates around the curvature of the canal. So what Inhiki was able to do was he can grind the flutes of the files after they have the controlled memory put on them, which means that they maintain their sharpness. So all of the other manufacturing processes in the world, they grind the files and then they put the controlled memory on them, which makes them dull. So that sharpness that's maintained in addition to the controlled memory is the secret sauce. And if you think about a wire that's 0.1 taper, or one taper, that's a tiny, tiny taper. And to be able to take a little tiny wire like that and an 0.1 taper and grind on it, that's just spectacular. That's a real feat to be able to do that.
You have lectured, all around the world. We were talking before the show, you lectured in Kathmandu, and we have a similar buddy there. I want to keep going around the world, just because some of these people, that was so fruitful in what you said about EasyEndo. Another one is the Japanese company Mani, mani.co.jp. You like any of the Japanese stuff?
Well, Mani is a very interesting company. I was both a Mani dealer as well as a Mani consultant. I don't mean to toot my own horn, but probably when I'm sitting in my rocking chair, one of the things that I'm going to be the most proud of was that as a Gaijin, as a foreigner, I was a Mani consultant, and I was the first foreigner to be a consultant for them on the dental side ever. And that was a real honor to because the Japanese companies tend to be very, very Japanese in their thinking, in their personnel, in their customs, in the way that they talk to each other, the way they communicate. So, it was really a privilege and an honor to be able to work with Mani. To answer your question, Mani has the best selection of hand files, stainless steel hand files anywhere in the world. The variety, the sizing, the different indications. Nobody in the world comes even remotely close to Mani in terms of variety as well as selection across indications and platforms. The challenge, I think, is, the thing to keep in mind is globally, if you go to a place like Bulgaria or Bosnia or parts of Russia, very few people can use nickel titanium files because they're too expensive. So a root canal in Russia costs, depending on where you are, or in certain places in the world, it'll cost $100 for a root canal. Well, you can't pay $65 or $100 for a pack of nickel titanium files. So where Mani is so tremendously successful is that with this variety of hand files they have solutions for clinicians who practice in places like Thailand or in Malaysia or wherever, where they're not using nickel titanium and they're still using Gates drills as well as stainless. So to answer your question, I like all of the Mani hand instruments. They're the best quality in the world, and the variety is second to none.
So
really good stuff.
Is the founder, president, CEO, that Toshihide Taki, is he an endodontist?
No, Mr. Takai is he's the chairman of the board. I think he's the chief executive officer. Mr. Matsutani, I'm forgetting his first name. He still
Masaki.
Yeah. He was the past president of Mani, and his I believe his brother or his father was the previous president. And it's funny because I bet Mr. Matsutani actually still owes me a bet from the 2016 election. So if he listens to the podcast, he bet me over dinner in Utsunomiya that Hillary would win the election. He was sure of it, and I said, no, she's not going to win. I didn't know that Trump was going to be the Republican nominee, but if he's listening, he still needs to pay up for that bet.
Oh my God! Well, I that election caused this podcast. I owe all this to Trump and Hillary because it was a year before the election, and I started getting all these emails saying, "Dude, I got an hour commute to work, and I can't listen to this crap for an hour each way. It's too toxic and insane, and all that kind of stuff." That was these are wild times. Well, let's. But what do you recommend? Any of their products today? I mean, are you using any Mani products today?
Yeah, I use a wide variety of all of their hand files and all of their gates drills.
Huh. Yeah. And why is that?
Well, because, to me, I can't practice endodontics without a number 6 file or a number 8 file. And so much of the quality of your endodontic procedure has to do with having the right equipment at your fingertips when you need it, in the right length, in the right size. So, if you ask me, what does an endodontist do? About half of what an endodontist actually does is get patency. And we're picking through, calcifications and getting around curvatures. And so Mani hand files are, have the right blend of stiffness and flexibility to get around those curvatures. And then there's a lot of specialty indications. So, for example, if you want to use a flare file, which is an O5 tapered hand file, to determine, if you have a certain dimension in the junction of the middle and the apical third, if you've created that particular flow and deep body shape, then they have a file for that. If you're doing a lot of retreatment, their headstrom files are excellent. And the variety of sizes, like they have an 18 millimeter, a 21, a 25, a 28, and a 31 millimeter length. So when you need it, you need it. And Mani has all of those indications. So my sponge is full of Bossy Logic, Naitai, and Mani hand files.
Now, when you were talking about EasyEndo, that's also EasyEndo USA?
Yeah, they changed names. They did that at the end of my tenure of being the general manager. We went from being EasyEndo USA to being EasyEndo.
Because it's more global instead of EasyEndo USA. You said you saw a lot of them in Brazil.
Well, they're selling a lot. Actually, they're growing all over the world, leaps and bounds. And they're doing, I don't have proprietary information, but I'm confident that they're also either going to be doing or doing some OEM work for other people. But they're now a global company selling all over the world, including Japan.
What about ultrasonics? I know you consulted with Tun Ultrasonics. Are you? Did I pronounce that right? Tun Ultrasonics.
Yeah. So there are two excellent ultrasonic manufacturers that nobody's ever heard of, and they're a lot less expensive. And one of them is Tun, and they're based in Wisconsin, and the other one is Helse, HELSE, down in Florida, and they're two very different lines. The Tun tips are more for gross indications, vibrating posts, doing MB2 location. They're very inexpensive. They're $20 for the non-coated tips and $24 for the coated tips. And then the Helse tips are much more, they're for finer indications. They have a wide range of tips, including surgical tips and perio tips and different a range of instruments, but the Helse tips would be, in my hands, more for removing separated instruments or trying to get around an obstruction or to get out if I ever needed it, to get out a thermofill device or a lentulo or something like that. But those are two sets of products that represent excellent quality for really good value. So, and they're not household names.
So the company's name is Engineered Endodontics, but it also goes by Tun Ultrasonics, or is Tun Ultrasonics the main product of Engineered Endodontics?
Well, I'm not sure, but the owner is Mark Fiorina, and I think they're changing the name to Tun Ultrasonics, but don't quote me on that. I think that's what they're doing.
Huh. And what did you say the owner's name was?
Helse, Helse.
Say it again.
Helse. Helse or Helsey.
That's his first name?
No, that's the company name.
That's the company name? Oh, that they're going to change engineered endodontics to?
No, engineered endodontics will become Tun Endodontics, I believe.
Okay.
And Helsey is a different company entirely.
Okay. And who's the CEO of Tun Ultrasonics?
Mark Farran.
Mark, how do you spell his last name?
Fiorina.
And is he an endodontist?
No, I believe he's an engineer by training.
Huh, that is amazing how people get into something. I mean, could you imagine getting into an endodontic company and you weren't even an endodontist? That's amazing how that works. So, you just mentioned Thermophil. I remember when that came out, having a carrier was kind of mind-blowing, and some endodontists had a hard time accepting that. It's a name I haven't heard in a long time, Thermophil. How's Thermophil doing, and what are your thoughts on carrying gutta percha down with a solid carrier?
Yeah, good question. How's it doing? I think it's got a stable base of users. And, is it going to grow in popularity over time? Probably not, because I think that the Brasseler technique of bioceramic sealer in a single cone for the general practitioner in particular, there's a simpler, less technique-sensitive solution in the Brasseler option. No disrespect to Dentsply. So to answer your question, Thermophil is probably used by 20 to 25% of the general practitioners. It's probably used by less than 2% of the endodontists, if that, in the U.S. I've never used Thermophil as a technique. And the problem really, Howard, is not Thermophil. The challenge is that if you don't shape the canal appropriately and you just take a carrier and you heat it up and stick it down, you can get a white line to the end of the root, but you really haven't truly cleaned and shaped and obturated the canal. And when the canals are underprepared and not irrigated properly, and you just stuff, a gutta core or a plastic carrier down the canal, you really haven't fulfilled the biologic objectives of endodontics. So I've had to retreat too many of those underprepared canals, so I'm a little bit biased. It's not a technique that I would personally use, but it's certainly a valid one.
That was started by Ben Johnson in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
I'm well acquainted with Ben.
Oh my God, that guy was so cool. I got out of school. I was 24 and I was a baby and I was doing these endos, and I called him and asked him a question, and he just flippantly said, "Well, you're in Phoenix. Southwest Airlines flies nonstop from Phoenix to Tulsa, Oklahoma for like $200. Why don't you jump on a plane and come spend the night with me?" And I said, "Well, what's the name of a hotel that I can make a reservation on?" He goes, "Screw that. Just stay at my house." I mean, and I went and spent the whole damn day with him. He was an amazing man. He was the inventor. He lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma, so that's why they started Tulsa Dental Products. Ben Johnson. I want to go back to. I asked you about, why do root canals fail? And then we talked about a lot of things. What about CBCT? If you're doing, again, critical mass, one root canal a week, is the CBCT standard of care? And I know, and you do a lot of defense and endodontic work, and I know standard of care is about as definable as a pink unicorn on another galaxy. Is CBCT standard of care?
At times, in certain indications, certain cases, I'd have to say yes. Endodontically, I would have to say yes, because all of the surgical indications for sure, and in the retreatment realm, there are certain cases where, I think you would be hard pressed to say you fully diagnose the case without it. It gets a little bit gray if you've got, number 8 and it's wide open. Do you need a CBCT? Potentially, not in that case. But the thing is, Howard, that there's so many non-endodontic uses for CBCT and non-implant uses for CBCT that, and CBCT is a really exploding kind of body of knowledge in technique-driven the technology is really driving technique and treatment planning and thinking and endodontics across a wide range of things, not just how we do the root canal, but how we measure success and failure and things like that. So to me, it's an indispensable tool. And if I was a general practitioner, even if I didn't, and I only did one endo a week, I would potentially, I'd go out and get a CBCT because when you need it, you really need it. And there'd be plenty of places where even in non-endodontic indications, you'd want to see what's there 3-dimensionally. So I'd want to have it. I wouldn't want to practice without it.
Is there any CBCT that you like more than others? I mean, they can be very expensive.
Well, I'm going to answer you 2 ways. I've always practiced in places that already had one. So no, I can't say that there's been one that really stands out. I know that the Carestream is probably, I'm going to swag that's the most widely purchased one amongst the specialist community. But one of the things about CBCTs is, let's say you're a general practitioner and just like a used microscope, there's plenty of used CBCTs out there that would cost $15,000, $20,000. And if you're only going to use it twice a week, and maybe you're not placing implants, but you just want to have it at your disposal, there's ways to get in inexpensively and play with the technology and not have that $80,000 to $100,000 buy-in. So there's ways to get in less expensively.
I asked you about the Japanese company, so it wouldn't be fair to not ask you about Metabiomed, the Korean company next door. Do you use any of their products?
Yeah, traditionally I've used their sealer, but I've been transitioning away to go from their resin-based sealer to using bioceramic sealers. I think that the bioceramic calcium silicate sealers are really ultimately the way to go for biocompatibility. One thing I was going to say, which is interrelated to a lot of our conversation, which is that a lot of these dental companies don't have dentists on staff. And I think one of the things that the general practitioner and maybe even some of the specialists may not realize is that a lot of these companies have engineers who are literally reading textbooks and scientific articles in the background, and they're designing the products that are ultimately being put out into the marketplace, and it's the marketplace that's really doing the beta testing. And it could be NiTi files, it could be, certain devices that are used in the operatory. So I don't know that I have a point other than we think that dental companies are, doing a lot of prototyping and that things are really well thought out and well organized, and there's a clear demand for the product. And it's really interesting, kind of what gets commercialized and what doesn't, and how tested it is before it's released to the market. So when you get something that isn't really working the way you think, the reality is that company may not have vetted that product with a wide range of clinical prototypes, even though they have a 510K. And that kind of stuff is really fascinating to me. And I think there's a company called Celerant, Marty Jablow and John Fluke, and there's some other doctors involved. One of the things their company does is vet products and test products and create design suggestions. And, hats off to those guys. I think that's a really valuable service.
What's it called?
That they're Celerant.
Spell it.
Cellerant.
Huh. And Fluky's my classmate from UMKC Dental School, class of '87. Love that guy. And
good guy.
so Celerant. Not seeing any other Celerant Consulting.
Yeah,
Is that what it is?
right.
Yeah, in our lifetime. Yep. Yep, there's John Fluky. There they all are on the CelerantConsulting.com. Well, how many companies have you and I been tested on in our 30 years? I mean, my gosh. I mean, there was Art Glass. There was Targus Vectorus. There was, I mean, there were so many. Do you think it's still an issue, or do you think the companies are getting it that they really need more R&D?
I don't think the companies are getting it, because there's kind of two models of companies. There's the big behemoth that there's the Dentsply's of the world that have well designed and organized opinion leader groups, and then there's a host, a large number of small companies that don't have the resources to have a dentist on staff or an endodontist, whatever, on staff. And or what happens is the companies run by a clinician who's the only clinical input into the kind of the design and the manufacture of the particular product. And that's not a good thing either, because you don't have a diverse set of opinions about kind of what features or benefits the particular product needs to have. So I guess my point in bringing it up is, one of my frustrations over the years has been, you buy something only to find out that it really doesn't work the way that you thought it did, and you spent anywhere between $1,000 and $5,000 to find out that it's going to gather dust, and that's really frustrating. So I guess it's a buyer beware from the clinician's standpoint.
Yeah, and the other thing is just don't, if you're listening to this, don't be bleeding edge technology. I mean, I see all the kids diving on stuff when they're right out of school, because humans, the human condition is they want to believe stuff, and a lot of the stuff they say they just want to believe it. And my gosh, in dentistry, it's a business. So when you try these new Art Glass crowns or these new Targus Vectorus crowns, and 2 to 3 years later the whole thing is falling apart, guess who's going to redo that crown for free? Otherwise, you're going to, you don't want to have someone upset with you that lives 5 miles from your office and hates you for the rest of your career. You don't want a lawsuit. I think I've avoided all my lawsuits just because I just, like you said, you gave them their money back. You showed you care. You didn't lie. You're honestly had empathy and sympathy. And so when this new stuff comes out, let the idiot down the hall try it. Let them do it for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I mean, you got great technology that's working. It's like when people want to take away my Emperor gum. Dude, I've been using it since 1984. You got to give me a really, really, really good reason to try to throw away my Emperor gum. I mean, hell, it's made in Germany, the home of Mercedes-Benz and all those great products. It's just perfect. Let's switch gears completely from technical endo to, again, advice for these young kids. They're coming out of school. They're $400,000 in debt. They're the majority of the listeners to this show. What advice do you give them?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, because I wish that I had somebody speaking to this in 1985 when I graduated. Right off the top of my head, the first thing that comes to mind is, one, don't get divorced. and number two, you got to know where you want to go in your career, which means you can't spend 5 or 10 years kind of muddling around in DSOs, or maybe you want to associate to learn the business. There's nothing like getting in there and going straight towards what you really want to achieve. So if you're thinking about specializing, then fully pursue investigating that. If your heart's in public health, there's nothing wrong with being in public health. Really spend some time reflecting and learning and asking a lot of questions about both of yourself and the people around you about what that best outcome is, what does success look like later on down the road. And one of the other things, which is kind of the counterpoint to the divorce comment, is you absolutely positively have to restrain your impulse to go out and buy stuff. You graduate from school, now you're $400,000 in debt, and then they're willing to give you money to buy that big car and buy that house, and all of a sudden you're $1 million in debt. And now you have to go to work, not because you want to, but because you have to. And now you feel a certain pressure that you wouldn't otherwise have. And the years go by really quickly. So, if I had some advice, it would be have your financial planning sorted out related to your career goals, and making sure that whatever you're doing on the relationship side and in your personal life is compatible, so that you don't create unsolvable problems where you have to go to work and you're really not liking it. A lot of older dentists, collectively, the more of them you speak with, the more wisdom that you're gonna accumulate through those conversations. One thing I think is a fair statement is we're clinicians, we're not business people. And we make really bad business decisions even because we're not really trained along those lines. And, one of my other little bits of advice would be to go to your bookstore or your Kindle and start to read all of the classic business books. I did that and it made a huge difference. Business, books on customer service, pricing, marketing, advertising, because ultimately at the end of the day, patients know your bedside manner. They get a sense of your empathy, your caring. They don't really ultimately care as much they care about how they're treated personally, not so much about how tight your margins are. So having a business sense blended with the right human touch and the right value system going into the operatory, that's a really important set of things to get right from the beginning, and putting the patient first. And it's not it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You're not going to arrive 5 years out of school and now I got the big car, I got the big house, I got the whatever. Those are kind of illusions because you got to pay for them. And it's a lot easier to buy it than it is to pay for it. And it's kind of funny because my income obviously has changed because I don't own a practice anymore, but I have more money than I ever had before because I don't spend it. Because I drive a 2009 CRV that's got hail damage on it, but it works just fine. I don't have to have a Range Rover. I've had 2 or 3 of them. And it's funny how just that sort of peace of mind, especially financially, relationship-wise, really makes a difference and makes going into the operatory a little easier because I want to go in, not because I have to go in.
So you said, when you're coming out of school and the average is $289,000 of student loans and they think it's a big deal, but you said don't get divorced. The average dentist divorce is over $1 million. So if they're coming out of school, 280 to 300, their divorces are a minimum $1 million. So what advice do you give them on how not to get divorced?
Well, that's not a question I expected this morning, but here's my observation empirically, and this is a little bit off color and I'm treading on thin ice, but it's my observation that a significant number of dental offices have the spouse in the office. And my interpretation, I've been in probably more dental offices than anybody on the planet. I've walked into 1 million dental offices as a endodontist, meeting dentists in different locations. And, it's my observation that the spouse is there not necessarily to pitch in at the front desk. The spouse is there to help, how would I say this delicately, protect their assets. And how do you not get divorced? My best single advice is be the person that your spouse needs you to be, and be the person that you want to find, because if you're doing all the right things in your relationship, then you're going to attract that kind of person back to you. I'm very happily married, and to my wife, I say unconditionally yes. I trust her unconditionally. And I was divorced twice before, so I know of which I speak. But, finding someone and nurturing that relationship, we're not here on a marital podcast, but that just takes a lot of work and a lot of humility and time. When you're in the office, it's called resisting temptation. And that temptation, oftentimes, if you're a man, is sitting across the chair from you. And it's just one of those kind of, how would you say it? It's gravitational. So, and faith somewhere definitely comes into that as well, to have the right values, to be faithful to your spouse. But all of those things wrapped into one, I think they can help you from getting divorced.
Awesome advice. Well, when these kids come out of school, the ADEA says they're averaging about $289,000 student loans. But again, a kid costs that much. So in 1945, the average American was having 5 kids per family. Now it's 2. So just look at your student loan debt as like 1 kid. Maybe instead of getting married and having 3 or 4 kids, like I grew up in a family of 7 kids, I had 4 kids, maybe have 1 less kid. There's a lot of, if you're saving the planet, the one thing no one ever talks about is the fact that, what's destroying the planet is too many Homo sapiens. I mean, we're coming up on 8 billion, and that's just a lot of people, considering that in 1900 there's only 2 billion. But the other thing is, you mentioned about owning your own practice. Dental specialists, according to the ADA, dental specialists average 320. General practitioners average 197. But if you micro down on those numbers, dentists who own their own practice make 244. Dentists who are employees are 147. That's $100,000 difference. So 3 years working for someone else would have paid your entire student loans. I mean, if you're going to make $100,000 less than an owner, and I want to ask you about that, because you said something that I want to challenge. You said when you're a man, you have to resist a temptation, but the literature is pretty clear that men and women are equal in that. I mean, when a man's stepping out, 95% of the time it's with a woman. I mean, it's kind of an equal thing. And a lot of people are saying that since the demographics has changed in dentistry, since when we were in school, it was 80% males. Now it's half women, half men, that a lot of these women aren't going to want to own their own practice. They just want to be employees. Are you buying that, or do you think that's just some weird assessment?
I don't really have any inside information into the workforce statistics of what the female graduate is doing, so I can't really ultimately speak to that. But Howard, you brought up one interesting point, which is it's really interesting to me. So there's so much debate and consternation and anxiety amongst young dentists about purchasing a practice and going into practice, and whether they would, could, or should buy practices. And, the specialists are not immune to this either. And ultimately, if you want to be your own boss, then you need to buy the practice. And if you're comfortable being an associate and you want somebody else to manage the business side of it, then, that's fine. One of the things that's often overlooked in this conversation about the student loan debt is, if I was going to do it again, I'd go in the public health service, or I would go in the military, let them pay for the dental school, do my service, and then come out essentially debt-free, and learn your chops in one of those 2 formats. I worked for the South Central Foundation up in Anchorage for almost 2 years, and I really learned up there. It was a public health clinic. It's a Native corporation clinic. And one of the things I learned was that there are a lot of non-traditional paths, and that there's not one right way. If you want to be an associate, be an associate. If you want to go in public health, be in public health. If you want to own. But whatever you do, I've seen so much hand-wringing, and I've spent hours and hours and hours talking to young doctors and a lot of older doctors. What kind of practice do I want to be in? Or, is it time for me to sell? Or, is it time for me to stop practicing? Or should I change where and how I practice? And I just find some of the hand-wringing to be a little bit over the top. If you're worried about student loan debt, go in the service or go in the public health service, or get in a situation where you're going to make, tune your lifestyle down, like you said, in terms of maybe children or where you live or what debt you take on, so that you can afford your payments and enjoy your practice and live in proportion to your income.
Yeah, I think it's the number one cause of almost all stress in rich and developed countries is people live above their means. I mean, they always want everything, and you just can't have everything. And if you want everything, you're going to have to spend your whole life trying to make the money for that. And dentists, I mean, my God, sometimes you look at their lifestyle and it's like, are you a rapper? Are you a baller? Do you play for the Cardinals? I mean, did I miss something? I thought you were just a general dentist. And they have every toy known to man. And then you meet back up with those people and they're 50 and they're still paying money on other people's money for their house, their cars, their just everything. In fact, it's funny when dentists get in my car, they always say, "What the hell happened to your door?" I was taking my granddaughter to school, and right as the car was leaving, she opened the door and it hit the garage and it bent the whole thing. And I didn't want her to be sad, and I got out and I had to body slam it back. But I love that dent more than anything, because my granddaughter made it. It's a 2004 Lexus. I don't give a crap about that dent. And every time I take it in, they want me to give them $98,000 for the 2019 Lexus or spend $2,000 fixing that door. It's like, I know what that was like 30 years ago. I don't live that way. You know what I mean? I mean, their vacations. Yeah. I mean, they had dinner Friday night with two dentists and their family vacation. One went to Spain, Germany, Amsterdam, and back home. I'm like, why didn't you just go drive up to the Grand Canyon? I mean, that would have been, a couple $100, and you just dropped 20 grand. I mean, they just spend way too much, and it's the root of all stress. Just it's not what you earn, it's what you burn. And 2 PhDs wrote a book a long time ago, The Millionaires Next Door, and what blew everyone's mind is that teachers was the occupation that had the most millionaires, because when you're a teacher, you're like, well, teachers don't drive Mercedes-Benz and live in big houses and take trips to Europe. We're teachers. But they just did that consistent 3 to 5% savings of every paycheck throughout their entire career. And when they were 65, they were the most likely to be a millionaire. And I'll never forget in Phoenix, Arizona, when that Keaton went bankrupt. And my gosh, that guy had made $100 million a year half his life and didn't have a nickel saved. But he had helicopters and mansions and owned islands, and it was just runaway debt. My God, gosh, we went well over an hour. Is there anything we didn't talk about that you wish we did, or that we were planning on?
Well, it's interesting in this. Let me backtrack just to one important point that we didn't touch on. You kind of tangentially mentioned it. Was one other little bit of advice for the young doctor is have a financial plan, have a financial planner, stick to it, start saving from day one, because the teachers and the firefighters, the public servants who have union positions, they're kind of into forced savings. That's how they end up being relatively secure in their retirements. As dentists, we don't have anybody kind of doing that for us. We have to be self-motivated. And I can't quote you statistics on the number of dentists who have nothing saved or haven't, maximized their pension plans, but you don't want to be in that group. You don't want to be, 60 years old where I'm at and have nothing saved, and then, or not enough saved and have to keep practicing, because that's a really dreary existence where you have to go back or you have to reinvent yourself at a certain age and try to do it again. So, one of those other little tidbits is, when you're 25 and you graduate from dental school, you're never going to get old. You're never going to, you're never going to be short up here or, bulging in the middle or those kinds of things. But, it happens in the flash of an instant. And, what you do today is your future tomorrow. And one of those pieces of preparation is certainly the financial preparation. And one other little tiny observation, I can tell you from personal experience that everything we do in our careers, for better or for worse, comes back to either, pat us on the back or we pay for it later. Every bit of karma, everything we said, everything we did, patience. It's amazing how interconnected the world is in terms of what we did in certain times. And it's something to be mindful of as you work through your relationships with patients. Your patient comes out of your office, they had a good experience. They might only tell one or two people, but the one that goes out and tells 10, there's just bad karma there, and it magnifies both good and bad throughout the rest of your career. And it's been interesting to me over the years to kind of say, I met that guy 20 years ago or that gal 20 years ago, and now you see them again in an entirely different context. Really important to, the karma of treating people well. It's really important to keep that in mind and to basically be kind. No, I guess the only other thing I could say, Howard, is, in some ways being, I'm not exactly sure what comes next in my career. I'm going to continue the expert witness work. I love working in Alaska. Alaska is one of the greatest places in the world. I have some incredible adventures. I just got back from the Bering Sea, looking for glass Japanese float balls on the beach. We found 750 of them camping with some native men off the coast of Port Heiden, Alaska. It was an incredible adventure. So, and I'm going rafting in a month or two down a river for a week. And so there's just incredible adventure there. But in the bigger picture, trying to figure out kind of what I want to do and take my own advice, just like you're right out of school. Well, now I'm kind of at that other end. Do I want to take on other companies that approach me or continue working in industry? I got to figure all that out. So I'm in exactly, in a sense, in the place that I'm talking to your young graduates about. So it's an exciting time for me, just like it's an exciting time for them.
Well, if you want more information, his website is MounceEndo. It's MOUNCE Endo. MounceEndo. It's Richard Mounce. It was an honor to podcast you today. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, very much an honor as well. Thank you, Howard. Keep up the good work. I'm a huge fan.